ago, last week, someone was teaching on why they thought the third seal was open, and we're just getting ready to go in the fourth seal. So I paid particular attention, and they brought out something that I had not seen, but makes so much sense. So before I tell you, I'm going to show you what they brought out. And to do that, we're going to look at Luke 14:19. So he says right here, and another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, I go to examine them. Please have me excused. Then in Acts 15:10, now therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? So in that passage, in Acts 15:10, can someone define for us, what does it mean, yoke, right here in this passage in context?
Well, didn't we just read a little tiny bit of it?
Pardon you?
Did you read the whole?
You want to read more of it?
Well, we kind of just threw out a little.
Okay.
So you're talking about Luke 14:19?
No, Acts 15:10. Which one are you talking
No,
about?
the first one.
The first one, Luke 14:19?
No, we're looking at this Acts.
Yeah.
Now, we'll put it right
What was
here.
the first
Acts
one?
15:10. Now therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the back of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But we believe that we will be saved through the grace of Lord Jesus, just as they will. So, there's enough there for the context. What does he mean here? What is this yoke?
Burden?
Burden. And what kind of burdens were they putting on them? These were the Pharisees, the spiritual leaders. What were they putting on them?
On the apostles, they weren't allowing them to speak of Jesus.
That's
It works.
true.
It works.
But let's go back. And what they're talking about here is the early church putting the yoke of the circumcision, the law on these people, right? This is the yoke he's talking about. You're placing a yoke, the laws on these people that on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear. Why are you placing all this burden of these laws? Yes, James.
This is exemplified, I suppose, by Jesus' words in Matthew 23:3-4. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. He's talking about the teachers of the law,
Yeah.
and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them.
Okay.
He says later, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Okay, there you go. So you see the context of a yoke. It's a pressing law and legality, right? Okay, well that word, where did I do it? Okay, that word yoke is zygon in the Greek, and it's an interesting word. And let's look at other places that word is used in the Greek. Here in 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? So what does he mean here? Somebody want to, in this context, how does this differ? What is this yoke?
Children of Satan versus the children of God.
He says, don't be unequally yoked. What does he mean, unequally yoked to them?
To be around them.
Around them or
Tied to them.
tied to them, connected, contracted with them, right?
Yeah.
So, the yoke that is being spoken of there, it's a figurative use of an actual thing. The yoke is the thing that fits over like an ox's
Like
neck.
an oxen's neck.
And their shoulders would pull into it as they drag the plow or
Yeah.
the wagon or
Yeah.
whatever. And so when you have 2 oxen, they are yoke mates. So
Yeah.
I bought 2 yoke of oxen.
Yeah.
So now you can do a double hitch and you can tie them together. Now, to be unequally yoked makes your cart go in circles because you've got like a donkey and an ox. They don't take the same size stride, and unequal yoke mates, you can't pull in a straight line because they don't pull with the same force. They don't take the same size step. They don't do any of those things. So do not be unequally yoked means you're not ever gonna be in stride. And you can even go back to Amos, can two walk together unless they're agreed? Because people do, when they're walking together, they'll fall into cadence with each other. But when you've got an unequal yoking, then you're not gonna make straight furrows. You're not going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. You're gonna go in circles. So do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers is making that physical reality picture of what happens spiritually when you go into some sort of venture where you are tied together with an unbeliever toward some goal. It's not going to work.
Okay,
you wind up with the United Methodist Church.
Very good. So the yoke is so that each party shares the burden, as James said, equally. But it's a burden. It's a burden that is placed. So the yoke is a burden placed. Do not be unequally yoked. That means do not share a burden. Do not go into contract, would be the easiest way to say it today. Do not go into an event. Do not go into a something that takes resources from each of you, because you are yoking yourself together. Okay, so, and then we have this one in Galatians 5:1. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. So how does this one differ? This yoke of slavery, is it different? Does it mean the same thing? What is the yoke of slavery?
You're bound to it.
You're bound to slavery, right? So you're carrying the slavery on you. You're carrying that burden on you, that yoke of slavery on you. You're trying to carry that load with slavery. I'm going to turn my hearing aids up so that I don't speak so loud. If I can
Did you
figure
signal
out
him?
where to do that.
4 or 5 times.
Oh, really? It's good on the thing.
Yeah. So if I turn it up, I sound like I'm really noisy now. Now I won't speak so loud. Okay, so that's yoke. So we can see that a yoke is a yoke is something. It's kind of like James said it on oxen. It connects one oxen to the other so that they pull together. It's kind of like a balance beam, right? Okay, so we understand the yoke. And the reason we did this little exercise on yoke is because there's a seal that talks about a yoke, but it's not translated as a yoke. So we're going to look at that. And that happens to be Revelation 6:4. And or 6:5. We're going to start on 6:5. And I'm going to read it. You can see it up here on the screen. The Greek is over here, 6:5. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a yoke in his hands. The exact same word that was translated yoke in every one of those other verses. Here, the authors decided to translate it as a pair of scales.
Yeah.
And the reason is because a yoke in its physical form looks like a balance scale. But if we change this to the way it's used everywhere else in the scriptures, to a yoke, let's look at how different the seal looks. Now, I'm going to show you that it's the same in the Greek. And here we are, Greek 5. This would be 6:5. When he opened the seal third, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come look." And behold, a black, the one seated on it, had they say balance scale. But that's zygon. the exact same words. The interpreters interpret it. And in fact, if we look at 22:18, which is Strong's, it is a crossbeam between the sides of a ship, which served as a bench for rowers, but normally means either scales or a yoke in both sentences. So the authors, the 2000 or whenever they interpreted this into English, must have been King James, when the Sir King James translated English, he saw that word and he chose, or the king didn't really do it, it was the Geneva Bible that was picked. They chose to translate that into pair of scales. But the word is right here, zygon, and it doesn't say a pair. All it says, it had yoke in his hand. So, how does that change this third seal if we look at this third seal as a yoke? And better yet, does that line up to what we see is happening in the world today? James, I can see you've got all kinds of questions going on in your little mind.
Well, yeah, because we're watching all kinds of people yoked together.
And we're seeing all kinds of people putting under the yoke.
We're seeing alliances coming together and putting themselves, nations coming together in alliances, putting themselves under the rulership of somebody else. That would be taking on someone else's yoke.
Yes.
Because you're promising to pull their wagon for them the way they want it pulled.
Yes. So Black Horse's rider had a yoke in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice of historian saying, and this is where they probably made that interpretation context. Well, a quart of wheat, it costs a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley, it costs a day's wages. So that must be a scale. But do not harm the oil and wine. But I believe that is correctly interpreted yoke. And its rider had a yoke, as James said, going over the world, binding the whole world under one yoke, what we call the one world ders. Now the Bible tells us that the one world ders don't make one world, they make 4 beasts. And we see those today, and those 4 beasts all have the same goals, the same priorities as Satan. So Satan is the one that's putting the yoke on these 4 beasts, and then they're spreading this yoke out over the world. And if you look at the world events today, with the idea, is this rider riding, putting a yoke on the world? That makes sense.